Välkommen till Stolpe Stories, en podcast om litteratur och humaniora från Bokförlaget Stolpe. Vår värd för programmet heter Svante Tirén.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine has been ongoing for almost 2 years. But the roots of the war extend further back in time and connect deep historical traumas and wounds with the scenes of unimaginable destruction and human suffering that we see today. What can we in Sweden do to make a difference, and what lessons from both the past and the present do we need to learn in order to understand what is happening? Stolpe Stories are honored to have Mr. Andrij Plachotnjuk, Ukraine's ambassador to Sweden, on the podcast. A very warm welcome and thank you for joining us, Mr. Ambassador. I wanted to start by going back a little bit. The relationship between Sweden and Ukraine before the war. In your experience, how much did Swedes generally know about Ukraine and vice versa?
Thank you for this generous introduction and thank you for having me. And the issues that we are going to discuss are really important during this most challenging and difficult times in the history of my country. When we're talking about how much knowledge both people in Ukraine and in Sweden had of each other before the war, definitely we knew many things about Sweden, and so did Swedes about Ukraine. Firstly, let me start by saying that we have had many common pages in our history. We all know about glorious Vikings times when they traveled down the Dnipro River to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire, and making trade, making connection, starting relations with foreign lands and foreign peoples. I think many in Swedes and its general knowledge that Ukraine was and is the second largest country in Europe in terms of its total area. Another issue that all Swedes, and I think everyone in Europe knew about Ukraine long before this war started, that Ukraine was often called as breadbasket of Europe. In view of its agriculture, in view of its soil, and in view of its agricultural potential. As for Ukrainians, definitely before 24th of February last year, we had a lot of knowledge about Sweden. And not only about our historical past, which goes back more than 1,000 years ago, and then during the Cossack times, the constitution of Philip Orlik, which is preserved here in the National Archives, the relations between the Hetman Ivan Mazepa and Charles XII, the King of Sweden, and many other pages of our joint history. We also knew definitely about Swedish inventions that changed the world.
All right.
You know about this famous book which was published during your presidency in the European Union. It's a very unique book with so much knowledge and so many interesting facts about how Sweden contributed to the development of the world in many spheres. Definitely we all knew your famous musicians and composers like my generation and the generations before I was born. That's ABBA, that's Rexette, that's Europe, and many other important things that we all know about your good country. When it comes, I will come back to history. Many Swedes know about old Swedish village in the territory of the Kherson region, which is called Gammal Svenskby. It's a very unique village, and it's, let's say, a small bridge that connects our two people, our history, and our cultural relations. Many Swedes also know and remember this huge tragedy and catastrophe, the Chernobyl catastrophe of 1986. So I think, generally speaking, I'm not talking about professionals who were majoring in, let's say, at that time, Soviet studies and then, let's say, Eastern European studies. I think general understanding was pretty good about both countries.
As you say, there are many connections between Ukraine and Sweden, both historically but also in the recent, probably more than people realize actually. But since the invasion started then in February last year, Swedes have certainly learned even more about Ukraine. But beyond the war, what aspects of Ukraine do you wish Swedish people knew more about? Because now, of course, all focus is on the conflict.
Definitely, if we had peaceful times right now. I wish we had more of culture, more of sports, more of literature, and more of Ukrainian humanitarian nature here in Sweden. It's one of the important things which connects people, which produces more understanding of each other. But now definitely the top and the most important thing and top priority is definitely the war. And what is important in this sense, and it's one of the key spheres where we are fighting, it's fighting for truth, fighting for our culture, for saving our cultural heritage, fighting with this propaganda and producing objective information about what happens in Ukraine. This is very important because what we see now on the ground, we see clear activities and very deliberate actions of Russia to erase everything that could tell the outside world about Ukraine, about its past, about its history, culture, cultural heritage, and its literature, whatever.
Because now, obviously, the focus has to be on the war because we need to do everything we can, of course, to make peace and so on. But in the long-term perspective, are you hopeful that Swedes, as a result of this, also will be more curious and more knowledgeable about Ukraine's extraordinarily rich history, culture, literature, and everything that's going on?
I totally agree that even now we managed during the war to bring artists, musicians here, which is a very strong message of solidarity from all Swedes, because we had ballet troupes and concerts arranged here so that Swedes had more knowledge about Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian music and Ukrainian artists. And definitely in view of such level of support and solidarity with Ukrainians and Ukraine from all our Swedish friends, definitely the interest towards Ukraine when we face the issue of reconstruction, of inviting a Swedish business to Ukraine, rebuilding Ukraine, rethinking Ukraine. Definitely I see that there will be more and more interest.
New relationships will build, of course, after
absolutely,
this. Yes.
Absolutely. I'm more than confident about this. That we will have not only cooperation which will be focused on the most topical issues like the support in defense, economic, humanitarian, and political sphere, but also definitely in expanding this cooperation. And when we're talking about literature, we're talking about artists, we're talking about television, we're talking about all this creative industry.
And again, there are many links in between.
Absolutely.
As you say, misinformation is just another form of violence, and it's so important to remember that the war is not only happening on the battlefield, but also in the media, in how we talk about each other and so on. So historical knowledge about the past, what role does that play in all of this?
Yes, it's very important. It's very important to preserve this historical knowledge because I have mentioned a couple of minutes before about this, our famous document about Ukrainian governance, how it should be arranged. It's called the Constitution of Belief Orlik, which is preserved in the National Archives. When we open new pages in this very important sphere by presenting to the public the results of historical research, it's absolutely very important because it's a strong instrument and strong argument in our fight against this propaganda of the Russian Federation. Because once again, they're doing everything to have no Ukraine in minds, no Ukraine in art, no Ukraine in literature, and so on and so forth.
It's about really destroying a history in order to make story.
It's really about destroying everything about Ukraine.
And that is, again, a form of violence that we must be very mindful of. Now, the books that we have published are, of course, by Lutz Klevemann, by Karl Schlögel, and a few other writers that takes up this whole connection between Ukraine's history, which really is a history of Europe, a history of so many relationships back and forth and so on. Why do you think this history has been forgotten? I mean, because these books, for a lot of people, it's a surprise to know, for instance, the connections between Ukraine and the Western Europe and so on. So why is it a surprise, and how can we make this better known today in the midst of all of this?
Firstly, in my opinion, the history wasn't just forgotten, it was falsified.
Right.
And some facts were erased, other devised and even made up. Totally create a new reality. And let me say that rewriting the history of the captured territories is one and has always been one of the key aspects of Russia imperialist narratives. And that was one of important arguments to justify its aggression against Ukraine. So we know that there are numerous facts of the distortion of the Ukrainian history by Russia. And we also see the facts indicating the purposeful destruction of the culture and language of Ukraine. So we can go back to history, but it has always been their practice. So trying to present the things other than they really used to be, and to call the black the white and vice versa. So they consider it to be a strong argument in justifying all this, their wrongdoings and violations of everything, let's say, international law.
So that's another long-term question. I mean, as you say, it's been deeply rooted in the Russian imperialism to change history, to destroy history, to distort it. And of course, that takes time to discover all the consequences of all of that. So that's another long-term thing to really think about. One day, when the war is finally over, apart from humanitarian support and reconstructions, what kind of cultural conversations and other initiatives do you think would be helpful in the process of rebuilding and strengthening ties? Because, as you say, humanitarian, that is one thing, but the conversation, what kind of talks should we have, Sweden and Ukraine, about culture, about exchange after the war?
It's a very important question, and when we face the post-war reconstruction, definitely the cooperation in the humanitarian sphere will be one of the important pillars that will be connecting our people and broadening the mutual understanding between the two peoples. We can start with a very simple example like cooperation between museums. It's very important now. A lot of things and a lot of activities are being made by Swedish museums within international cooperation framework by supporting Ukrainian museums, by preserving the artifacts. We could arrange new exhibitions. We could think about exchange among musicians. We have something to propose to the distinguished Swedish audience. We have musicians, we have artists. So in view of this increasing interest that we will have in the years to come, we will have a lot of opportunities to bring people together. We have had these exhibitions before, which were related to our joint historical past, but we will be arranging these exhibitions, for example, next year, about Ukraine, about Sweden, about our relations during the 1000-year time.
Most people in Sweden do not have direct experience with the trauma of war, and at the same time, it's essential to spread awareness of the deep effects of war on both individuals and entire societies. How can this be effectively achieved? I mean, because again, it is a difference in the experience. A person who has never been to war won't know the full experience. So how can we do this, do you think?
Firstly, this work and this experience is being shared by Ukrainians and Ukraine with all our partners and friends, including definitely Sweden. When it comes to the resilience of people, when it comes to how to achieve the unity among them, this is the knowledge that we share with our Swedish friends during conferences which took place, for example, during the last year. So Swedes definitely have a lot of friends because many of them are supporting and making generous donations and going to Ukraine. They have their networking there. So it means that they receive this information firsthand from their Ukrainian friends. How to arrange your everyday activities in the times of crisis, of such important things when they happen. What to do, how to have this resilience, how to be united, how to arrange the activities of social workers and, let's say, medical workers and all this thing that should be done in order to meet the basic needs of people. So this is the thing that we are actively communicating to Swedes and to all our friends abroad. So our experience is being thoroughly examined, and I think that the relevant authorities here and elsewhere, they produce very valuable recommendations how to behave yourself if the situation requires.
So really it's about sharing the story, because even if people here don't have war experience, by you sharing the stories and by us reading the news, then there will be a connection.
Yes, and once again, your authorities, your agencies, which are in charge of total defense and issues of the resilience of people, they are producing their recommendation based on our experience. Because one thing is the experience and the knowledge shared by ordinary people, by ordinary Ukrainians. Another thing is when we have the communication and the connections at the level of the relevant authorities. So we have, I would say, two channels of communication on these issues between the governments and the people.
It goes really all the way from politics and governments and authorities down to peoples, individuals talking to each other.
Yes, absolutely.
The war has been ongoing now for almost 2 years. How does one hold up when something goes on for such a long time?
Many people in Ukraine are definitely tired of this war, of these atrocities, of this pain, blood. But at the same time, we really invest a lot of resources and a lot of ideas in having this unity. And another issue which is equally important, I would say, is the motivation, high motivation of people, and especially our soldiers on the battlefield, and their high morale. These are the three important things for us, apart from many other most topical problems and issues that we should solve on an everyday basis, but we are really working on that. People are united, people understand, and which is also important in the sense that we understand what we are fighting for. We are fighting for dignity and freedom. And take into consideration all that pain and all those atrocities that were brought by Russians to Ukrainians. Definitely, we are so united, we are so resolved in continuing our fight to be free.
So really, this sense of that you are united, that is really what keeps you up.
Yes.
That is the spirit for sure.
We should be united, and we are united.
Yes. What is something you look forward to in the long term run? I mean, now this is ongoing. Global politics are doing lots of things. There's a lot of things happening. What is, in your view, something positive to look forward to?
The life continues. The life continues. And despite almost everyday air raids and missile attacks and all the sirens, which are so loud in Ukrainian cities, people want to continue their life. They want to reform their life, and they want their country to be really prosperous and really democratic. And in this sense, this is our main goal, is of us to become a member of the European Union. We have a clear vision. We are now coming back to the European family of nations. We have always been there, but as I've mentioned many times during our podcast, the Russians did everything to erase this history and erase everything that would tell the outside world about the past of Ukraine. So the positive thing is that we think of our country, how it will develop, how it will become stronger, and how it will become prosperous, not only for our partners, but solely for us, for Ukrainians.
Now, the Ukrainian diaspora here in Sweden, how do you think its presence help increasing knowledge and understanding, and how can we support them, maybe further enhance and give them platform visibility? Because now there are more Ukrainians in Sweden than before.
As of today, we have around 55,000 of Ukrainians who fled the war after February 24th, 2022. And among them, we have 13,000 children. Before that, I think that we had around 13,000 before this big war started of Ukrainians who were registered here and lived here and had all this residential residence permissions. So after this war started, and even before, Ukrainians, they had their organizations, non-governmental organizations, and when this war started, they became very active in communicating the facts and the knowledge about this war, because this is a very important channel, not only to communicate between the governments and the parliaments, but also between ordinary people. So they are very active, not only in the sphere of communicating and delivering this truth about the war of Russia against Ukraine. They also help us to arrange, let's say, a number of cultural activities, a number of exhibitions, a number of other activities. And they're actively supporting, let's say, the newcomers from Ukraine in, let's say, bringing to them the understanding how the ordinary life here in Sweden is arranged, supporting them through the first stage after their arrival. So they're quite active. They're being supported by Swedish authorities. They're being supported by the European institutions in order for them to have this possibilities to enjoy life and to be very active. When it comes to the things, the good and positive things that the Swedish governments did since this big war began 2 years, almost 20 months ago, a number of programs were adopted in order to support Ukrainians. We all remember when this full-scale invasion started, a lot of local authorities and a lot of cities provided, free of charge transportation, public transportation, the access to museums, the access to hospitals, and many, many other things, which are really appreciated by Ukrainians. And that's the thing, among many others, that we are so much grateful to Sweden.
It's so true what they say. I mean, often a crisis brings people closer together. And in fact, we might even look forward to having stronger relationships than ever before between Sweden and Ukraine after this.
We enjoy, I would say, total support and solidarity here in Sweden, and we have different numbers which are produced by European agencies, but around more than, let's say, 90% of Swedes support Ukrainians. And you are so right saying that when people who fled the war came here, they started to be together and to be united and to have joint activities. So it also helps them to communicate with their compatriots and to exchange information. And this is the way to support each other.
And really, it's not perhaps so much about building a new relationship. It's about strengthening a relationship that was always there.
Yes, strengthening the existing connections and building new connections as well.
Right, that's something we can look forward to in the future. Well, thank you so much for coming here to the podcast, and good luck with everything, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you for having me. And thanks to all our friends here in Sweden for standing with Ukraine. It's really the thing that will never be forgotten by Ukrainians. When we're talking about Sweden and Swedes, we always say, and everybody in Ukraine knows, that Swedes stand on the side of the light when we are fighting this evil.
Very much so. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Tack för att du har lyssnat på Stolpe Stories. Missa inte att du som lyssnar har 20% rabatt på Bokförlaget Stolpes titlar hos Bokus.se. Aktivera rabatten genom att ange koden Stolpe20. Och för att lyssna på fler avsnitt, följ oss där poddar finns och på sociala medier.